That morning, in a courtroom polished to a shine, I realized something terrifying. My mother didn't just want my inheritance, she wanted me erased. And with 2 words, I shattered the power she'd spent a decade building. Welcome to the Confession Stories. Tonight, we follow the testimony of Rowan Pierce, a woman dragged into a political war by the very person who should have protected her. In Briarwood Summit, power shapes truth, until Rowan uncovers a trail of secrets connecting her mother, Councilwoman Marjorie Pierce, to the one judge who should have been impartial. What begins as a will dispute becomes a dismantling of an entire system, one built on influence, loyalty, and cruelty, disguised as family. This is the confession that ended a dynasty, and the truth hits harder than any verdict.
My name is Rowan Pierce, and if you'd asked anyone in Briarwood Summit about my childhood, they would have told you I grew up lucky. Big house on the hill, perfect lawn, mother on city council, father in tailored suits. From the outside, it looked like a beginning. Living inside it felt more like a waiting room built for someone else's life. My mother, Councilwoman Marjorie Pierce, didn't raise children. She curated assets. Love, in her world, wasn't a feeling. It was a strategy. If you were useful, you got attention. If you were quiet, you got tolerated. If you were inconvenient, you disappeared behind a closed door while she rehearsed another speech about family values. My father, Daniel Pierce, existed in the spaces her ambition left behind. He'd sit at the edge of the dining table with the newspaper folded, always half reading, half retreating. Sometimes he'd open his mouth like he wanted to say something kind. Then he'd hear my mother's heels on the marble, and whatever courage he had would fold back in on itself. I learned early that silence pleased her. If I laughed too loudly, she'd say, "Rowan, you sound unpolished." If I cried, she'd sigh, "Control yourself. No one respects a girl who leaks emotion." So I stopped laughing loudly. I stopped crying where she could see. I turned myself into background furniture in my own childhood home. But there was one person who never asked me to shrink. My grandmother, Eleanor Hartwell. She didn't live on the hill. Her cottage sat near the old part of town among cracked sidewalks and maple trees that leaned over power lines like they were gossiping. Her house always smelled like cedar, lavender, and something warm in the oven. She wore soft cardigans with pulled threads, and her eyes had that kind of tired kindness you only get from surviving more than you complain about. Eleanor wasn't impressed by titles. She was impressed by follow-through. She used to say, "Money should serve purpose, not ego." And she proved it. She'd founded a small community foundation in East Briarwood, a place people like my mother pretended didn't exist unless there were cameras. Every Saturday, I'd follow my grandmother there, my school shoes scuffing the concrete steps, my fingers trailing along the framed photos lining the walls. Those photos weren't art pieces. They were faces. Kids in graduation gowns, parents hugging them, little notes scribbled under each frame. First in her family to go to college, scholarship recipient, class of 2012, back as a mentor. I once asked, "Why do you keep all of these up?" She smiled, pressing a hand to my hair. "They remind me why we're here," she said. "Money is loud, Rowan. Purpose is quiet. Don't get them confused." My mother, of course, hated the foundation. She never said it outright. She was too polished for that. But she'd make offhand comments like, "Mother plays charity with real estate money while I'm actually shaping policy," as if generosity was a hobby beneath her pay grade. They only shared 2 things, DNA and a refusal to back down when they believed they were right. It made family dinners feel like diplomatic summits. I still remember one in particular. I was 15. My mother was gearing up for her first major election. Eleanor had come up the hill for a unity dinner. The chef served salmon with some kind of reduction I couldn't pronounce. My mother raised a glass and said, "To family, my strongest foundation." Eleanor's smile barely moved. She tapped her fork against the plate and said calmly, "I always thought your strongest foundation was your polling data, Marjorie." Under the table, my father's knee bounced. My mother's jaw clenched for half a second, too quick for cameras, but not too quick for a daughter trained to read her. She replied with a laugh that sounded like ice in a glass. "Mother, not everything is about politics." Eleanor just looked at her and said, "In this house, it usually is." I learned something that night. You can live in the same family and still belong to different worlds. Years passed. My mother climbed the political ladder, one hand on the railing, the other on the optics. Her campaign photos always featured carefully staged family moments, me smiling in the background, my father hovering at the edge, my grandmother notably absent. Eleanor refused to attend her rallies. "You don't need me there," she'd tell me, sliding a cup of tea toward my side of the small kitchen table. "You already have a crowd. I'll stay where people come for help, not headlines." Then, slowly, the forgetting began. At first, it looked like normal aging, misplaced car keys, a kettle left on the stove a little too long, the same story told twice in one afternoon. I brushed it off because the alternative was too heavy to hold. One day, I came by the foundation after class. Eleanor was standing in the entryway, staring at the wall of photos. Her finger hovered over a frame of a boy in a blue graduation gown. "Isn't he yours?" she asked. I frowned. "Mine?" She smiled faintly. "Yes, dear, your brother." "I don't have a brother." The word Alzheimer's arrived a few appointments later, spoken by a man in a white coat who looked too young to be delivering life sentences. I was 22 when Eleanor sold her larger house and moved into a small cottage on the edge of Briarwood Summit near the woods. I moved in with her. There wasn't a fight about it. My mother saw no downside. Having her daughter quietly manage a sick grandmother made for excellent talking points about family responsibility whenever a reporter needed a quote. Those 2 years in the cottage became the real education my family had never planned for me to have. I learned how to reset the same conversation 6 times in an hour without letting frustration leak into my voice. I learned how to hide Post-it notes where Eleanor could discover them and feel independent instead of supervised. I learned what it looks like when someone's mind frays, but their heart keeps its shape. Some nights she'd forget my name. She'd pat the couch next to her and say, "Come sit with me, dear. You remind me of someone I love." And I'd sit because she was still my grandmother, even if I had to carry both of our memories. Money didn't matter in that cottage. Campaigns didn't matter. The world shrank down into simple things. Did she eat? Did she take her medication? Did she smile at least once today? My mother visited occasionally, not as a daughter, as a politician. She'd arrive with a small entourage, photographer, aide, sometimes a local reporter, by coincidence. She brought flowers that clashed with the room and questions that weren't really questions. "Mother, do you remember how proud you were when I first ran for council? Tell them how I've always taken care of this family." Eleanor would blink, confused but trying to be gracious. Later, when the cameras left, she'd lean toward me and whisper, She looks so polished. Shame you can't polish intent. The final winter was quiet. Snow made the cottage look like it had been wrapped in cotton. Inside, Eleanor spoke less, slept more, and held my hand longer when she did wake. One particularly cold night, the heater rattled like it was protesting. I was sorting through bills at the small kitchen table when I found a worn, leather-bound notebook at the bottom of an old box. Inside were letters she'd never sent, recipes written in a looping script, and speeches she'd drafted but never delivered. At the back, there was a sealed envelope. On the front, in her careful handwriting, it said, "For Rowan." My heart stuttered. I didn't open it right away. There was something sacred about delayed knowledge. I tucked it into my desk drawer, telling myself I'd wait until I felt ready. No one ever feels ready. Eleanor passed away in early spring. The trees outside were just beginning to remember their leaves. I held her hand while she took her last breath, and for the first time, she looked truly still. I didn't cry that day. People think that means you're cold. It doesn't. It just means grief moved in long before death did. I organized the funeral alone. My mother arrived in black silk, makeup flawless, grief perfectly measured. Her eulogy mentioned sacrifice, legacy, and the values this family was built on. If Eleanor had been able to hear it, she would have laughed. When everyone finally left, the cottage felt airless. I went to the small desk in the bedroom, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope. My hands trembled for the first time in weeks as I broke the seal. Inside, there was a letter and a notarized will. The letter was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged in places where her hand must have paused. My dear Rowan, if you are reading this, it means my mind or my body has gone where my love for you cannot follow. I've watched you show up for me, not because there were cameras, but because there was need. In a family where so much has been spent on appearances, you chose substance. That matters more than you know. She went on to write about nights we'd spent at the foundation, about the way I listened to people's stories, about how I never once treated her illness as an inconvenience. And then, I have chosen to leave my estate, my savings, and control of the Hartwell Foundation to you. Not because I want to reward you, but because I trust you. Money must be placed in the hands of those who remember it has a job to do. Kindness must be inherited the same way wealth is, or it will disappear. By the time I finished reading, my vision blurred. Not from shock about the money, I hadn't even fully processed the numbers, but from the weight of something I wasn't used to feeling in this family, being chosen. For a while, peace came in the shape of paperwork. I met with accountants, signed forms, took over day-to-day operations of the foundation. I spent my days in the same building where I'd once walked as a child, tracing faces in frames. Now people came to me with applications, with hopes scribbled in ink, with questions about funding. It wasn't glamorous, it was right. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at the cottage. Thicker paper, heavier ink. The letterhead read Hawthorne Legal Group. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. I already knew who used that firm. My mother. Inside was a formal notice. Marjorie Pierce was contesting the will. The language was clinical, but the message was not. She wasn't just challenging a document, she was declaring war. That evening, she arrived without calling. I heard the tires of her car on the gravel long before the door opened. Her heels clicked across the cottage floor like they resented the lack of marble. She saw the file with Eleanor's will open on the table, something in her face changed, like grief had been peeled back to reveal something metallic underneath. "So," she said, picking up the papers without asking, "Mother left her entire estate to you." There was no question mark at the end of the sentence, just accusation. "She trusted me," I said quietly. "She trusted the foundation." My mother laughed once, sharp, humorless. "Don't be naive, Rowan. You're 24. You have no idea what to do with this kind of responsibility." "I've been doing it," I replied. "While you were filming campaign ads about community, I was signing checks to the kids your policies forgot." Her eyes hardened. That was the moment I stopped being her daughter and became her obstacle. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, sliding the papers back across the table as if she'd already decided. "You'll sign over control of the estate to me. I'll oversee the foundation in your name. The public will love it. Mother and daughter carrying on Eleanor's legacy together." "And if I don't?" I asked. She tilted her head like she was evaluating a stubborn intern. "Then this gets ugly. And Rowan, you don't win ugly." She left her card on the table, the crisp white with her title embossed in silver. When the door closed behind her, the cottage felt smaller, the air felt thinner. For the first time since Eleanor died, I allowed myself to cry. Not because I was afraid of losing the money, but because I finally understood something I'd been trying not to see. Love in our family had skipped a generation. The one person who had cherished me was gone. What she left behind wasn't just an inheritance. It was a line in the sand. And on the other side of that line, my mother was already sharpening her knives. The weeks after my mother's visit felt like living inside an approaching storm. The air was still, but the pressure was undeniable. And in Briarwood Summit, storms rarely stayed quiet for long. The first strike didn't come from lawyers, it came from whispers. Articles appeared online, small at first, like someone testing the water. Questions surround Hartwell estate transfer. Sources suggest undue influence as granddaughter inherits entire fortune. Every headline carefully crafted, every photo selected from the worst angle, my eyes mid-blink, my hair wind-blown, the kind of images that made you look guilty even before accusations were typed. I knew my mother's fingerprints anywhere. She didn't write these articles. She didn't have to. She just whispered into the right ears, and the machine did the rest. My phone buzzed non-stop. Colleagues, donors, even old classmates I hadn't spoken to in years. Not one asked how I was doing. They all asked what I had done. I didn't respond. I poured myself into work at the foundation, sorting applications, signing grants, meeting families who'd been waiting for years for someone in power to remember them. That work kept me grounded. It reminded me who I was before my mother tried to rewrite me for the evening news. But the storm only intensified. One morning, the foundation receptionist rushed in with a pale face and trembling hands. "There are reporters outside," she whispered. 10 of them, maybe more." I looked out the window. Microphones, cameras, lenses aimed like rifles. The moment they saw me, questions flew like arrows. "Rowan, did you manipulate your grandmother? Did you isolate her to gain control of the estate? Are you aware your mother is filing for emergency injunction?" I didn't stay long enough to hear the rest. I stepped back into the building and locked the door. That afternoon, I called the only person recommended to me by 3 different professionals in town, Alicia Grant, an attorney with a reputation for calm so unnerving it bordered on dangerous. She met me at the foundation after hours. Tall, poised, dressed in a charcoal suit that didn't wrinkle even when she sat down. Her voice was quiet, but not soft. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her about the envelope, the articles, the confrontation with my mother, everything except the part where I cried. That part didn't matter legally. When I finished, she tapped her pen once. "Okay," she said. "We start documenting every call, every threat, every article published from this day forward." Her plan was simple. Let my mother wage a public war. We'd build a private one, brick by brick, fact by fact. "Your mother wants a reaction," Alicia said. "Don't give her one. Give her records." It became our routine. I forwarded every message, saved voicemails, screenshot articles, every piece of the machine my mother was operating. But while we built our wall, hers grew louder. Billboards appeared around town showing her shaking hands with families, smiling at ribbon cuttings, speaking about protecting the legacy of Briarwood Summit. Every spot looked thoughtful and sincere. Every line felt like it had been written by someone who'd never lived a day in sincerity. The worst part? People loved it. Meanwhile, applications at the foundation slowed. Some donors pulled their funding until the matter is resolved. A few even asked me if they should reach out to the councilwoman to get clarity. It was working. My mother was isolating me the same way she accused me of isolating Eleanor. But Alicia didn't flinch. She said, "Rumors dig hay, facts don't." So we dug for facts. We reviewed bank statements, donation logs, event archives, anything connected to the Hartwell Foundation, any name that reappeared where it shouldn't. One name kept cropping up, Judge Meredith Langford. At first I thought it was coincidence. Briarwood Summit wasn't a big city. People overlapped. But then I noticed something off. Langford had attended multiple fundraisers my mother hosted. Her name appeared in donor lists, always under the reporting threshold, always just small enough to avoid scrutiny. When I pointed it out, Alicia leaned closer. "This isn't normal," she murmured. "Judges don't mix with active political campaigns. Not like this." We started mapping the connections on Alicia's laptop. Dates, events, checks, speeches. The picture forming was subtle, almost elegant, and deeply troubling. A week later, the proof became harder to dismiss. I was searching an old community newsletter online when I saw a photo, a grainy image of a fundraiser from 8 years ago. And standing behind the podium, smiling, hands clasped, was Judge Langford beside my mother. The caption read, "Opening Ceremony, Pierce Community Initiative, hosted by Councilwoman Marjorie Pierce. Keynote speaker, Judge Meredith Langford." I felt something sink inside me. A feeling like betrayal, but not personal. Systemic. "A judge can't keynote a candidate's fundraiser," Alicia said, voice tightening. "That's not just unethical. It blurs every line." My mouth felt dry. "So she'll be biased?" Alicia shook her head. "She won't think she is. Bias works best when the biased don't notice." The more we looked, the more the pattern sharpened. Same events, same guest lists, same donors, same cozy appearances disguised as community work. It wasn't corruption built overnight. It was architecture, years in the making. Suddenly, the upcoming court date felt less like a proceeding and more like a performance, where the ending had already been cast. But Alicia's eyes held something I hadn't seen in weeks. Anticipation. "This helps us," she said, "because connections leave trails. And your mother has never met a trail she didn't leave breadcrumbs on." That night, I drove back to the cottage late. Fog rolled across the hill roads, turning the town into a ghost of itself. My headlights struggled through it. When I turned into my driveway, a car was parked across the street, engine off. windows dark. I sat there, hands on the steering wheel, heart beating in a rhythm I didn't recognize. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A neighbor, a lost driver, anything. But the car stayed after I went inside. Stayed long enough that the silence began to feel like a message. I texted Alicia. She replied in under a minute, "Document it, don't engage, and keep every light on." I didn't sleep much, maybe at all. The next morning, Alicia and I reviewed everything again. She began assembling a formal dossier, every photo, every donation, every appearance. Something solid, something that could stand in court if we needed it to. Then she said something that chilled me more than the car outside my house. "Rowan, judges don't like being exposed, and your mother built her career on favors. But every system, no matter how old, has weak seams." She glanced at the screen again. "That seam is Judge Langford." I swallowed. "What do we do?" Alicia closed the laptop gently. "We keep digging, quietly, because if they've spent years building this structure..." She met my eyes. "Then one well-placed crack might bring the whole thing down." And that was the moment I understood. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a war built on influence, and I had just found the weak link. The morning of the hearing felt sanitized, like the courthouse itself had been scrubbed clean of anything human. The floors shined too brightly, the air conditioning hummed too steadily. Everything felt rehearsed. Alicia walked beside me, her heels making dull, purposeful clicks. I tried matching my breath to her rhythm, but my chest had other plans. Reporters waited outside the courthouse steps, lenses raised like spears. The moment they saw me, the shouts began. "Rowan, did you exploit your grandmother's illness? Do you have a response to the councilwoman's statement yesterday?" I kept walking. Alicia didn't so much as blink. Inside, the courtroom smelled of varnished wood and old paper. Like every emotion had been preserved, cataloged, and carefully filed away for display. My mother sat across the aisle. Marjorie Pierce, councilwoman, not Marjorie Pierce, mother. The distinction was important to her. She was dressed in charcoal gray, a color that told the world she was serious, stoic, and above reproach. Her hair was pinned in a perfect twist. Her expression was sculpted sympathy. Beside her sat her attorney, Benjamin Tate, one of those men who smiled like he'd already won. He shuffled his papers with the confidence of someone performing a well-practiced monologue. And then I saw her, Judge Meredith Langford, the woman whose presence had threaded through our research like a warning. She walked in with a calm that felt too familiar, the kind you only earn when you're not afraid of consequences. She didn't look at me, not directly, just a sweeping glance that passed over me like I was a minor administrative detail. Alicia nudged my arm gently. "Stay neutral," she whispered. "Let them reveal themselves." The hearing began. Tate rose first, his voice warm with faux empathy. "Your Honor, this case is not about greed," he said, hands folded like a pastor delivering a sermon. "It is about the well-being of a vulnerable woman, Councilwoman Pierce's mother, whose estate was transferred under questionable circumstances during a period of cognitive decline." Every sentence dripped moral high ground. Every gesture suggested righteousness. He never accused me directly, he implied, he insinuated. He crafted a portrait of me as naive at best, manipulative at worst. Then, as if on cue, my mother took the stand. She placed one hand on the rail, the picture of reluctant sorrow. Her voice trembled. She spoke of family strain, deep concern, fear for her mother's well-being, and Rowan's isolation of Eleanor during her final months. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not tears, rage, because I remembered every night I sat with Eleanor singing half-forgotten lullabies. Every grocery run, every appointment, every time my mother showed up for 5 minutes, posed for a photographer, and left. But she painted herself as the dutiful daughter, heartbreak etched into every syllable. You would have believed her if you had never lived beside her. When it was my turn, Alicia squeezed my hand once. A grounding pulse. I stood. My legs felt like they weighed twice their normal weight, but my voice was steady. I cared for my grandmother for the last 2 years of her life, I said. She was never isolated. She was loved. And she made her choice with clarity that my mother refuses to acknowledge. Tate objected. Of course he did. But the judge allowed me to continue. Not out of fairness, I suspected, but because she didn't think my words mattered. Then came the cross-examination. Tate circled me verbally like a hawk. Miss Pierce, are you trained in elderly care? No. Are you medically qualified to determine cognitive capacity? No. Isn't it true your grandmother was often confused during her final year? She had moments, so she was impaired? He cut my sentences into fragments, weaponizing nuance. Alicia rose. Objection? Argumentative. But Tate had already landed the implication he wanted, that I wasn't capable. When the judge called recess, my knees nearly buckled. Not from weakness. From the sickening realization that the courtroom was leaning her way, my mother's way. During recess, Alicia led me to a quiet hallway. She leaned against the wall, arms folded, expression unreadable. They're putting on a performance, she said. Langford is giving Tate too much room. She knows exactly what she's doing. I swallowed hard. So we've already lost? Alicia's stare sharpened. Not even close, but we're not going to win by playing their script. She reached into her folder and pulled out several documents, photographs, event flyers, donation logs. Our early evidence, the subtle stuff, the pieces that hinted at the truth without fully detonating it. I'm going to use these, she said. Not everything, just enough to shift the air in the room. When we returned, Alicia rose with deliberate calm. Your Honor, I'd like to submit preliminary exhibits to demonstrate the long-standing relationship between Councilwoman Pierce and Judge Langford. The room froze. You could feel the tension thicken, like humidity before lightning. Tate nearly leapt to his feet. Your Honor, this is irrelevant and improper. Alicia didn't look at him. She looked at Langford, directly, steadily. We simply request acknowledgement, she said, of multiple documented appearances at shared events, campaign sponsorships, and recurring donations, each under individual reporting thresholds. Langford's jaw tightened a fraction, barely visible, but it was enough. Tate sputtered. My mother turned pale beneath her expensive foundation. Alicia continued, These are not accusations, Your Honor. They are patterns. She placed the photos on the table. Langford glanced at them, too quickly, too defensively. Her gavel hit the block harder than necessary. Proceed, she said. But her voice had lost its smoothness. From that point forward, the room was different. The judge spoke less confidently. Tate stuttered twice. Small slips, but telling. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. Alicia had cracked the shell, not shattered it. But hairline fractures are where pressure does its best work. When the hearing adjourned for the day, my mother passed by me. She didn't speak. She didn't glare. She didn't sneer. She just stared, like she was recalculating the entire future in her head. Alicia placed a hand on my shoulder. "Today," she said quietly, "we stop their momentum. Tomorrow, we take the rest." And for the first time in weeks, I felt something dangerously close to hope. A small, stubborn ember refusing to die. The second day of the hearing felt different, like the air had shifted overnight. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to unsettle the people who relied on stillness to stay powerful. Alicia and I entered the courtroom early. The benches were mostly empty, just a few reporters pretending to check their equipment while actually watching for cracks in our armor. My mother wasn't there yet. Neither was Tate. But Judge Langford sat at the bench, rifling through papers with a tension she was trying very hard to hide. Alicia leaned toward me. "She's rattled. Good. Good." I repeated the words silently. It tasted foreign. For the first time, I wondered if justice didn't just require truth, but precision, timing, and the courage to strike when the structure was weakest. The courtroom filled quickly after that. My mother arrived with a controlled smile, one she used in photo shoots and condolence calls. But her eyes, they were busy, scanning, measuring, calculating. Tate whispered something in her ear. She nodded once, too quickly, a tell. Alicia noticed. When the judge called the session to order, Tate wasted no time reclaiming the stage. He spoke of maternal duty, public trust, and preserving the integrity of family assets. Every line polished, every pause dramatic. He ended with, "Your Honor, we simply request that the court invalidate this will for the sake of fairness and truth." Fairness, truth. Hearing him say those words felt like being stabbed with my grandmother's own knitting needles. Then it was Alicia's turn. She didn't rise with theatrics. She didn't arrange her papers dramatically or clear her throat like a performer. She just stood, straight spine, measured breath, eyes sharp. "Your Honor," she began softly, "what we are witnessing here is not a dispute about a will. It is a dispute about control. Control my client's mother is accustomed to wielding without question." Tate scoffed, but Alicia didn't even glance at him. She continued, "And because control prefers familiar pathways, we must examine the system those pathways travel through." Her voice stayed calm, her hands stayed still. But her words carried the weight of something inevitable. She lifted a single folder, not thick, not dramatic, just intentional. "My client would like to introduce one final exhibit." Tate shot up instantly. "Your Honor, this is highly improper." Langford silenced him with a raised hand. "Proceed." But her voice cracked on the second syllable. Alicia opened the folder and slid one glossy sheet forward, then another, then a third, all facing the judge. Photos, donation summaries, event flyers, years of quiet intersections between my mother and the one woman presiding over her case. Alicia didn't accuse her of anything. She didn't need to. She let the evidence sit there, quiet, damning, unignorable. Then she said the two words that felt like dropping a match into a dry field. "Judicial disclosures." The entire room froze. Reporters stopped typing. Tate's face drained of color. My mother's shoulder twitched, and Judge Langford, for the first time, lost her composure. Her hand jerked. Her breath caught. Her eyes darted not to the papers, but to my mother. For half a second, just half a second, but half a second in a courtroom is an eternity. Alicia's voice sharpened. Your Honor, judicial ethics require that any pre-existing relationship between the presiding judge and a litigant be publicly disclosed, no matter how minor. Langford opened her mouth, but nothing came out, only a thin exhale. Alicia pressed gently. We respectfully request either full disclosure or recusal. Tate erupted. This is outrageous. This is an ambush. This has nothing to do with the validity of the will. Alicia finally turned to him, her expression cool, professional, deadly. Counselor, if this case is as pure and righteous as you insist, why the panic? The gallery murmured. Langford slammed her gavel. Order! But her voice was shaking. Then, the moment everything shifted, my mother leaned forward and whispered sharply to Tate. Too sharply, too urgently. Her lips tensed, her hand shook. And the room saw it. Everyone, reporters, spectators, the judge, me. Her panic wasn't maternal concern. It wasn't grief. It was fear. Real, unfiltered fear. The kind that only appears when a person realizes their power is slipping through their fingers. Langford straightened. Her face stiffened. Her hand moved toward the stack of papers as if searching for something to anchor herself. And then she spoke, mechanically, like someone reading from a script they didn't rehearse enough. The court will uphold the will of Eleanor Hartwell and dismiss the petition to contest. A beat, a shallow inhale, a flicker of humiliation. This ruling is final. The gavel cracked against the block. Loud, too loud, more like a collapse than a conclusion. Reporters exploded into whispers. Tate sank into his seat. My mother didn't move, not even to blink. She sat completely still, as if stillness could reverse time. Alicia squeezed my arm. You did it, she whispered, but I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I looked at my mother, the woman who taught me silence, control, self-erasure, the woman who believed power was her birthright, who believed no one could touch her, not judges, not journalists, not even me. And now she was the one disappearing behind stillness. She turned her head just slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet. Her expression was empty, not angry, not pleading, just hollow. It was the closest thing to an admission she would ever give me. Alicia gathered our things. We need to leave before the press corners you. We walked out of the courtroom, down the hall, past the reporters, past the cameras, down the courthouse steps and into the cold air that felt like freedom wearing winter's coat. Later that week, everything happened fast. Too fast, like a dam breaking. Judge Langford resigned, citing health reasons. Within days, the Judicial Review Board launched an investigation. Her name flooded the news, not as a respected figure, but as a symbol of compromised ethics. Then it was my mother. Her donors withdrew, staff members resigned, an ethics inquiry opened. Her campaign office shut its doors overnight. Her social feeds went silent. Power evaporated. And she had no language for life without it. People called to congratulate me. Reporters requested interviews. Strangers emailed to say I'd inspired them. But I ignored them all. Winning didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally exhaled. When the estate became officially mine, I stood in my grandmother's foundation, surrounded by the faces of the students she'd once helped. Photos of futures she'd invested in, lives changed by kindness. And I finally understood what she meant when she wrote, "Kindness must outlive fear." I wasn't meant to inherit money. I was meant to inherit purpose. So I took a breath. The first full one in months. and stepped into the life she'd hoped I'd build. No titles, no campaigns, no cameras, just legacy. And the chance to do it right.
You've just heard Rowan Pierce's confession, a story about power, inheritance, and the dangerous silence families learn to live with. What happened in that courtroom didn't just expose a corrupted system, it exposed the cost of surviving one. Rowan didn't fight for money. She fought for her grandmother's legacy. And for a truth her mother spent years burying beneath influence and fear. And in the end, the empire built on image collapsed, not because someone shouted, but because Rowan finally refused to stay quiet. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts below and tell us what moment hit you hardest. This is the Confession Stories, real voices, real secrets, and truths that demand to be heard.